Okay, so good evening, everyone. I'm Brunette, the co-host of the Zimbabwe Research Network webinars. Today, we are joined by the esteemed Mr. Edmore Chijoko, who is a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe in the Faculty of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Today, he's going to be talking to us about the African Continental Free Trade Area and the Peace Trade Nexus. And we're going to get a lot of information of how this is benefiting or is not benefiting Zimbabwe at the moment and how we can improve it. So basically, Mr. Edmore his research focuses on peace and security policies, criminology, communication, adult education, including the African Continental Free Trade Area. So over to you, Mr. Edmore, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you to all the attendants. Your cameras and mics are muted at the moment, but towards the end of the session, we're going to open up everything and you have the ability and the free chance to ask Mr. Edmore any interesting questions that you have. Thank you for attending, and over to you, Mr. Edmore.
Thank you, Brunette. Thank you to the whole Zimbabwe Research Network for the opportunity to be with you this evening. My name is Edmore Chijoko. I'm a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe, and I also work with the African Continental Free Trade Area Studies Center here in Harare, Zimbabwe. Tonight's presentation is entitled The Peace Trade Nexus, Key Strategies for Delivering on the African Continental Free Trade Area. And this work is coming directly from a chapter that I contributed, a newly published book, The New African Thinkers, Trade and Sustainability under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The book was edited by Simelane, Zaka, Moyo, Juve, and Mpambukeli, all of the Human Science Research Council of South Africa, and it was published by Lynn Rayner Publishers in March this year. And this is the volume. In case you come across it, this is how it looks like. It's also on the screens. That's the book that we are talking about. The book, the chapter that I contributed is chapter 6 of this volume, and it covers a lot of ground. But tonight I will narrow it I'll narrow it on one practical thread. That is the case for the African Union embassies at country level, and why that's the piece that makes the peace trade relationship actually work for the African Continental Free Trade Area. Let me start with why this matters right now. What we are seeing in these statistics on the screen is that we have 1.3 billion people as a potential single largest free trade zone by population anywhere in the world. That is bigger than NAFTA. That is also bigger than the European Union single market. And we also looking at 3.4 trillion in combined gross domestic product. That is the financial weight Africa could bring to its own place in the global economy if implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area holds. Then we are also seeing 50% plus increase in intra-African trade, which tells us how low our starting point is. Africa still trades more with Europe than with itself. Then the African Continental Free Trade Area exists to reverse that. There's also 10 million new jobs, and I tied that statistic deliberately to youth unemployment as one of the most pressing human security challenges this continent is facing. Here is the problem. The African Continental Free Trade Area is generally a noble and ambitious idea, but its very success brings a fresh set of problems. The gains rarely land evenly on a continent that is already unequal, and that unevenness feeds irregular migration. And I think we have seen what that leads to from what was happening recently in South Africa. So the question this chapter asks is, how can African countries bolster governance, peace and security for the successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area? And secondly, I answered that question in the chapter of that volume through an integrative literature review using 6 theoretical lenses for analysis and synthesizing academic literature and institutional reports. And worth noting is that already 54 of the 55 AU member states have signed on to the African Continental Free Trade Area. This shows that political will already exists. And that is exactly what makes the governance gaps so urgent to close. But here is the central tension. The same open borders that carry trade also carry risks. And these are some of the issues as shown on the slide. We are talking about a 5-fold increase in terrorist attacks. For example, in the Sahel between 2016 and 2020. And this is happening directly on the trade corridors the African Continental Free Trade Area depends on. This is the governance vacuum being exploited along the continent's key integration zones. First, political instability such as coups, contested elections, weak state authority create unpredictable regulatory environment, and that scares away investment and formal trade. And we cannot keep on romanticizing about informal trade or black market. Then secondly, illicit trade and crime, for example, smuggling, counterfeiting, and money laundering are structural features of many regional economies in Africa. And thirdly, criminal networks adapt to new trade routes faster than our institutions can respond. Third, governance gaps include inconsistent implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area obligations across the 8 recognized regional economic communities. Along with that, exclusion of women, youth, and the civil society from the structures shaping trade policy. In a related work that we co-authored together with Wellington Logo and Professor Godfrey Kore, published this year, we looked at the very states expected to enter regional value chain. That is Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Mozambique. And every one of them remains gripped by conflict, with measurable falls in their gross national income and social cohesion. So the argument we make in that publication is that peace is not a precondition for trade success. It's a partner. The two go hand in hand. So what does this chapter propose that I'm presenting today? Its most innovative contribution is a structural one. That is the African Union Embassy model, which I believe is the work that many of us as researchers and academics must push towards our policymakers, such that it is pushed to the higher echelons, to the African Union Assembly for discussion. Right. In the next slide, we are looking at the theoretical framework. We are looking at the theoretical framework giving us the 6 perspectives. Sorry, I'm missing a slide, but that's okay. The theoretical framework with 6 perspectives. What this theoretical framework entails is we have a number of perspectives that are also our governance framework in a number of states in Africa. We have the liberal peace theory, which talks about trade interdependence and how that can be a stabilizer between states. And we also have the human security perspective, which talks about, which shifts the referent from the state to the person or to the individual. And in a nutshell, that's about human welfare or human security issues. Then we also have the constructivist perspective, which is about how norms and identity shape cooperation among states. Then we also have the realist perspective, which talks about the reality that states still guard their sovereignty and self-interest over the relative gains of integration. Then we also have the illicit trade theory, which looks at how criminal networks adapt just as fast as institutions do, or even faster. Then the last one will be the trade liberalization theory, which frames the economic logic the African Continental Free Trade Area is built on. And why I use these six lenses and not one? That's because together they review the multifaceted strategies needed to address both the economic and social determinants of stability. These theories converge on one diagnosis, which is Africa doesn't lack peace agreements. Africa doesn't lack trade agreements, but it lacks the connective tissue between them. And that's the flagship recommendation in this work. And here I'm now talking about formulating or establishing the African Union embassy in all member states. Right, that's the diagram that I was missing with the six theories. And I'm quickly moving to the next slide, now talking about the AU embassy model. This is the centerpiece of this publication. The AU embassy model is an original policy proposal. There is no direct precedent for it in the existing African Union architecture. The idea is having African Union commissioned embassies in every member state, distinct from national embassies, with one particular job of closing the gap between the African Continental Free Trade Area's continental ambitions and the governance realities on the ground. To be clear, this doesn't replace the African Peace and Security Architecture, the AfCTA, as we know it, but it buttresses it, plugging the African Continental Free Trade Area into peace infrastructure that already exists. So now let me walk you through the functions of the proposed AU embassies in member states. Function one is to liaise with national capitals. This entails real-time monitoring of implementation across the 54 member states or signatory states. The second function is about partnering with the regional economic communities and UNECA on infrastructure, mediation, and the disaster response. The third function is about coordinating border management with Interpol and the World Customs Organization so that the 90% tariff elimination target by the year 2030 is at least meaningful. The fourth function will be combating money laundering with UNODC, IMF, and the World Bank. These embassies become intelligence and coordination nodes for this work to be successful. Then function number 5 provides for the engagement of civil society and the private sector. Why? Because inclusive governance is not optional. Then the last function number 6, is about funding youth and women empowerment programs to address what fuels instability if these problems that we talked about are unaddressed. To do this, the African Union Embassy model sits on 3 mechanisms. The 3 mechanisms are coordination, resourcing, and oversight. About coordination, we are looking at sectoral divisions mirroring the African Union Commission, joint meetings, memorandum of understandings, and biannual reports to the African Union Assembly. Then on resourcing, we're talking about funding from the African Union budget, which can be expandable through voluntary contributions and donors, with staff seconded from member states. And this builds capacity, but doesn't create a parallel bureaucracy. Then on oversight, we are looking at an advisory board of independent experts, civil society and the private sector, with periodic African Union reviews. I want to be honest with you. The single hardest issue here is about sovereignty, because national interest alone cannot solve this problem. It takes standing together with our African brothers and sisters if we are going to move closer to the Agenda 2063. So this model doesn't stand alone. In our recommendation, it is plugged into the existing peace and security architecture. And I will walk you through the diagram that you are seeing on the screen. As you can see, the African peace and security architecture sits at the apex of the model, and beneath it is the African Union embassies, sitting as the connective layer to solidify the gains of the African continental free trade area. From that layer, three mechanisms branch out, that is coordinating, resourcing, and oversight. Each mechanism carrying the function I've just outlined. So what I want you to take from this chart isn't the list, but the flow of how things will be working. This is how authority moves down and how accountability moves back up. All of this feeds into 5 concrete sequence recommendations for policymakers. And I walk you through the recommendation. The first recommendation is to strengthen the regional economic communities by deepening capacity for conflict prevention and mediation and the infrastructure integration. Number 2 is to build effective governance structures. This is where the African Union embassy model sits, backed by anti-corruption frameworks in each and every member state and digital tools. Then number 3, to invest in human security, vocational training, market access, benefit sharing. These are security investments, not welfare add-ons. They are not just welfare add-ons. And number 4, we have to uphold democratic principles by ensuring free elections, independent judiciary, and mainstream our own conflict resolution tradition, backed by the Ubuntu tradition or philosophy and the Pan-African solidarity idea. Then the last one, number 5, is about monitoring and assessing. We need continuous evidence-based tracking of who benefits and who is left behind. So this isn't just abstract for us as a country or as Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is set to host the 19th African Continental Free Trade Area Council of Ministers meeting in Victoria Falls in 2027, and the Intra-African Trade Fair in 2029. And I hope this will be a success. So what we see here is that the price on the table, the 450 billion US dollar in additional gross domestic product by the year 2035. That's a huge amount. That's a huge target. It is achievable only if these recommendations are implemented alongside the trade mechanism and not after. Remember, I said they go hand in hand. So the AU embassy model operationalizes African solidarity, turning the aspiration of a single market into a secured and into a governed and an inclusive reality. So, ladies and gentlemen, the African Continental Free Trade Area's success is not a foregone conclusion. It depends on the political will to build the governance architecture that the trade liberalization alone cannot create. The African Union Embassy model is a concrete, is an actionable way the African Union can do exactly that. So, coming to a close, thank you, Chairperson. Let me hand the reins back to you. This will mark the end of my presentation. And thank you to everyone for listening. Ronette.
Yes, thank you so much, Edmore. It was quite informative. I think we're just having a mini discussion in the WhatsApp groups about how much information we take for granted and how much we actually don't know about what is happening on the ground. For example, when you mentioned that there was an increase in terror attacks, we don't know whether it is due to the AfCTA. Do you think it is due to this policy, or it is just parallel to the African Continental Free Trade Area policies?
All right, the idea or the assumption behind it is due to liberalization, we are talking about opening of borders to facilitate free trade of goods and services, free trade of people. So by opening borders with weak border management systems, it also creates risks such as terror attacks, human trafficking, drug trafficking, unbalanced migration, and all those such problems.
Okay, so maybe it is a consequence of opening the borders, but I was also interested that when you were speaking, you mentioned that Zimbabwe will be hosting the 19th session meeting of this trade. And now I'm laughing to myself because I was thinking that this is something that is very brand new, like it's 2 years old. So how long have we had this approach from the African continent for freeing the trade? How long has it been running? And when you're trying to answer it, may you please also answer to me, like, what is it really? What is this free trade policy? What are they trying to do? What is the idea behind? And are we trying to be similar to the EU Schengen area, where we've got free trade and free movement across the countries that have joined the Schengen area? So is this trade area, the African trade area, trying to be the same thing? And do we have, there are going to be many questions, but you can answer them chronologically, I think, in one simple thing. And do members have to pay money to join it? How do members join? Do they just sign a paper and say, like, we want to be part of this free trade area, or they have to meet certain regulations and stipulations for them to be able to be part of this free trade area?
All right. To be part of the African Continental Free Trade Area, remember this is the African Union initiative. It sits under the African Union. So by virtue of being member states to the African Union, we have an opportunity to take advantage or an opportunity to grab for the sake of improving our trade and the business. So remember, like I said, the problem is that Africans or African countries are trading more with European countries than with each other. So we are losing much in trading with other countries outside the continent than taking advantage of the resources that we have as Africa and trading with each other. That is keeping our resources and our wealth within the continent for the benefit of Africans. Remember, when I talked about the constructivist perspective, that we share common things as Africans, common identity, common values, culture. Even if you look at our flags, there are several similarities. The colors themselves, they tell you a lot about us as Africans. So we are trying to take advantage of that Africanness, that is African solidarity, so that we build the largest market for African countries to benefit from, to improve our commerce and our trade as Africans, than sending money outside by way of export coming from Europe, America, China, and all these countries. It's better we circulate our wealth within Africa than being taken advantage of other developed countries in Europe, Asia, and elsewhere. I hope I tried to answer. Did I leave?
Yes, you answered yes, but I can. I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions. Then I leave the floor for my co-host, Dr. Tatenda, and then afterwards we're going to open the questioning to the attendees. So if any attendees want to ask questions, please raise your hand. I already see one hand raised from Brian Masanko. You're going to come after Dr. Tatenda. If anyone else is interested in asking Edmore about the free trade area, you can also raise your hand, and then we're going to choose people according to the chronological order. So Edmore, my question also is, if we have had 19 years, I'm assuming that this is 19 years of this free trade area proposal, right? And the countries did not really ratify a proposal for this free trade. They just found themselves in this free trade proposal by virtue of being African Union members, right? We really did not there's no country that really put an effort to enable this continental free trade. I'm coming from the point of in the European Union, not all countries in the EU are part of the EU Schengen area, the free movement. But for any country to be part of that, to benefit from that free movement and free trade, they have to meet certain stipulations, like your budget, your economy, and then need to pay some amount of money for you to be able to use the euro in your country. So don't you think that if we're still having issues 19 years after the fact with the African free trade, it's because the countries are not really motivated. They don't have anything to lose by defaulting in the other risk areas you're talking about. For example, governance. It is governance which is the biggest issue, by the way, in Africa. No country has to really have a well-governed country for it to remain in the African free trade area, no?
All right. It's not like the countries just found themselves within the African Continental Free Trade Area. They have to ratify, they have to be signatories. But out of 55 countries in Africa, 54 have already signed to the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. The exception is Eritrea for their own reasons. Yes. So the idea started around 2012, but it actually materialized in 2019. So I believe African countries are doing their best to operationalize the African Continental Free Trade Area. Like I mentioned about the meetings that are coming to Zimbabwe, and so often with the Council of Ministers on African Continental Free Trade Area discussing issues and strategies for the implementation, for the successful, effective implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So it's not like the African governments are sitting back and watching whilst others take the lead role. But I believe governments are doing their best. But you see, this is a progressive approach that things have to change overnight. It's taking time because remember, we are talking about liberalization. It doesn't happen overnight. So here and there, policies are being changed, transformed, laws are being made, implemented, workshops, trainings are being conducted so that people gain awareness and how to take advantage of the benefits that come with the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Okay, so thank you. So Dr. Tashinda, if you've got a question, while she's unmuting a mic, Edmore, don't you think we're too ambitious to go for the African free trade area for the whole continent without at least looking at doing it for SADC maybe, or for the Eastern Bloc or for the Northern Bloc and separate? Then if it works, then we can expand.
Right. I think it's not being over ambitious, but also working within those regional economic blocks. It's a way to strengthen the African Continental Free Trade Area. Remember, these regional economic blocks are also recognized within the African Union. So the African Continental Free Trade Area can actually be operationalized through these regional economic communities.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Davinda?
Thank you, Brunette. Thank you, Edmore, for the presentation. I think that in general, it's a noble idea. However, I think you mentioned even some concerns, and the fact that there are some countries who ratified the free movement policy, and some said no. I think Zimbabwe said no to the free movement a part of it. So it's, to answer Brunette's question, maybe it's kind of similar to the EU in a way, but the focus is mostly on trade movement. I think, what was the other one? Let me check. Trade movement, and I think it's a comprehensive policy indeed, right? But I think the most important part is like being able to, for example, maybe not use the US dollar as a form of currency when you're purchasing from each other, strengthening each other's economies. And my concern, Edmore, is on the transportation side, because as we know, for economic development to, I guess, for it to exist, or for the economies to flourish, we really need good transportation systems. And it's very difficult for me to envision a successful, I guess, union as far as trade is concerned and agreement if we don't focus on infrastructure. I would assume, and I'm not sure if it's there, that maybe there were discussions on, hey, before we even say let's focus on ease of trade, etc., can we first heavily invest in our road infrastructure, right? On our, especially like from Zimbabwe to import goods from Congo. I feel like it's a mission, you know. So, and vice versa. I don't know how this is going to be successful, and I don't want to be pessimistic. Maybe you can enlighten us on whether there are policies also embedded in this big policy related to development, maybe with the African Development Bank. How involved are they as far as this is concerned in making sure that this is successful? I'm not a macroeconomist, so I really have no idea.
All right, thank you. I would like to believe that the African Continental Free Trade Area rules of origin or protocols have some guidelines for each and every member state to follow on how to implement the agreement. So some of those agreements touch on all those things, such as the civil society, inclusion of civil society, women, youth, on how to improve on technology and transport, as you mentioned. So there are a lot of things that are in those guidelines for member states to follow. So it's like a template of how member states can really engage with the African Continental Free Trade Area and improve their business, improve their export, improve their manufacturing, and all those things. Yes, I hope I answered you clearly.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if Brian Chisang, was it Brian Masango?
Brian Masango, if you've got another question, Brian, otherwise I've got questions from my side. Brian, do you want to unmute your mic and come online? Yes, you can ask Brian.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity and the good work that you're doing to bring us together to have this platform. I think it's quite informative. I have just a few, maybe about two things or two issues. We have had some organizations before where we were saying we want to come together as a people and work together and have a better civilization depending on our ideology of civilization, be it African, Eastern, European. Right. What measures are we having as this grouping that will make us be able to realize our goals? The reason why I'm asking is because I realize that these other bodies, like the previous speakers have spoken about, to say, is it not too ambitious to look at Africa as a whole when we've got the regional blocks like the ECOWAS, the SADC, and the other one, the Sahel region? What is it that we're failing at that level, at that mini level, to trade freely? I'll give an example of us here in Zimbabwe, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia. What makes us fail to trade freely, and what makes us fail to have that free movement where I can go to South Africa and a South African can come to Zimbabwe without even having to get a visa, go and trade, come back and continue? And then how are we going to regulate that environment in such a big scenario? Who is going to police who to make sure that those things, that kind of doing business is ease of doing business? Because for me, I think as individual states, we have a lot of things that we need to work on to make sure that we are able to relate and trade with each other in a free way, of which at the moment, from the way I'm seeing these blogs, yeah, we are still somewhere from a distance. I'm not sure, but I'm thinking that maybe since we are here, you can assist us to shed more light to us so that we can also understand the importance of the African Union embassies, so that we understand how is it going to solidify itself and make itself more forceful and even help these other blocks that we're crying about. Because as we're living in this anarchic world, who is policing who to do the right thing? Yeah, that's my concern. Thank you. Over.
Thank you for the question. And I've put back that slide that you are now seeing on the screen as part of answering your question. In this work that I was presenting today, I said this is the centerpiece of the research. And this is the recommendation that we made, that I believe that by establishing African Union embassies in each and every member state, we will be able to solve some of these problems that are preventing us from succeeding in earlier agreements on trade, on peace, and all those things. Because why has it been like that? These regional economic communities operate at different wavelengths, so to say. So it's what they call the spaghetti bowel problem. Because if we are operating in those bits and pieces in our different regions, the SADC, the EC, the IGAD, and so forth, we tend to overlap. We tend to use different standards, different rules of origin, and different reporting requirements. So it's not uniform on how we are doing business. But now the African Continental Free Trade Area is trying to consolidate all those efforts to at least be able to create a uniform standard of trade across Africa. Of course, with respect to different or country-specific or contextual needs, right? So these overlapping regional economic community membership, they create competing obligations and coordination burdens. But the African Union embassy model that I have proposed, it's like we are trying to decentralize the African Union from the overhanging continental level to the country level. for the specific of coordinating, resourcing, and oversight, so that at least we do not delay on intervening where there is crisis. For example, what has been happening in South Africa, if there was an African Union embassy monitoring things on the ground, it means improved early warning signs, improved or swift intervention where there is crisis, swift monitoring and evaluation of this implementation strategy, engagement with the civil society coordinated by the African Union embassies, engagement with all groups in the country, the youth, the underprivileged, the women, the elderly, the small and medium enterprises, etc., etc. So the African Continental Free Trade Area is designed to harmonize this. The Article 19 of the agreement supersedes the regional economic communities where it offers better terms. I think I've made this clear that the article says it supersedes the regional economic communities, let's say SADC, where it offers better terms. We would rather work with the African Continental Free Trade Area than the SADC. Then the goal is for the African Continental Free Trade Area to become the umbrella that consolidates the 8 African Union recognized regional economic communities. I hope I've tried to answer that clearly.
Yes, yes, I think it was it was a good response. I have a question.
Well noted, sir.
Yeah, well noted, yeah. So Edmore, besides the challenges or the pitfalls that are really preventing this trade area proposal to be fully efficient after maybe 19 or 10 years, I don't know, we probably have a pushback from the European countries who see this trade area as something that is threatening to their own economies. If we stop trading more with Europe and start trading more with each other, we're going to have like a pushback. Do we have this already in place? Like European countries or the West going like, no, 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 or trying to sabotage? Just asking.
I can call that conspiracy theories. Yes, we may understand that is happening, but we have no evidence to pinpoint where it is happening. But I believe there's been tremendous support from Europe, from European Union, even from the United Nations towards the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Well, I think my point is coming from the fact that it also comes back to what Dr. Tashida was saying. Like, was saying that we are going to agree to stop using the US dollar to buy from each other. So which currency then are we going to use, right? Because we know that most of the West African countries, they use francs, you know, even if the French themselves no longer use the francs, right? So to begin with, the currencies that we use are not ours most of the times. And two, most Western countries, they really like having the currency aspect as their foreign policy, right? I mean, when most of the Western African countries started pulling out from agreements with France, there was an uproar in France, and Macron had to come to Africa in person, you know, to see that things are going okay. So in as much as we're saying that the West is supporting this trade, is this on paper or in reality? Because in reality, there is more influence if their money is being used outside of their country. Like America benefits from this. But anyway, like you said, maybe just a conspiracy theory or conspiracies that we might just be talking over maybe when we're having drinks. So I think if we don't have any more questions, I don't know if Edmore, you've got anything more to add on.
All right, let me say briefly about the currency issue that you raised. Don't you think, as academics in our different fields, we still have a long way to go in looking into these issues and how we can recommend or offer suggestions to our policymakers for improving the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. If, say, you are an agriculturalist, let's say within the SADC region itself, we produce the same type of agricultural product. If we are farming maize, tobacco, cotton, that's the same in the SADC region. So how are we going to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area? Then this is where we come in as researchers, as academics, in our different fields. For example, in the agriculture field that I have just mentioned, we are looking at value addition, how we can take advantage of secondary agricultural products for export. And let's say in the education sector, how we can promote the movement of the knowledge worker so that we have free movement across Africa of experts. Let's say we have a shortage of doctors in Zimbabwe, then we have doctors coming from, let's say, Nigeria, because maybe they have an excess of trained doctors, whilst we have
Yes, Edmore?
I think we lost him.
Okay, maybe he dropped off, but we're coming to the end, and so thank you. So whilst people are still here, can you see my screen?
Yeah, but it's very zoomed in.
It's very zoomed in.
At least in my end. I'm not sure if everyone sees the same.
Yeah, it looks hazy.
It looks hazy.
Yeah, there we go. Now we can see.
Now it's clear now.
Okay. Thank you. So next, thank you everyone for coming to this very interesting meeting. Next presenter on the list is going to be sharing with us some very interesting aspects of what they do is Dr. Shem Mugowa. If you're not aware who Dr. Shem Mugowa is, if you're in group 1, I think you've really come across most of his conversations. If it's written SH, right? Dr. Shem, are you online? Well,
Hello.
I think you.
Yes,
Dr. Shem. Your name in the WhatsApp groups is SH.
SM.
Okay.
SHM.
SHM. Okay, yes.
Yes.
So if you've come across a conversation from SHM talking about finances and marital couples, publications in Zimbabwe newspapers, it's probably Dr. Shem Mugowa. So Dr. Shem Mugowa is a lecturer in finance at Birmingham City in the United Kingdom and holds a PhD in finance, an MBA and a Bachelor of Commerce honors degree in finance. His teaching and research interests include corporate finance, financial inclusion, banking, investment, and entrepreneurship. So he's published lots of articles in journals, newspapers, financial inclusion, etc., etc. But next week, in 2 weeks' time, actually, when he comes to talk to us, we're going to talk about degrees in Zimbabwe. Are we running a degree manufacturing unit in Zimbabwe with no absorption? Like we're just churning out degrees and churning out degrees. I mean, where are the students going? Where are they being absorbed? Are these degrees important, right? Are they moving with the times or still doing very archaic degrees? So Dr. Shem, do you want to add something more for people to be very fired up to come to the next meeting, or we see you in 2 weeks' time?
Okay. I don't have much to add really, but it will be very interesting. I have done a lot of research on the degree offerings in Zimbabwe. Yeah, so expect fireworks.
We look forward to it. I think recently there were some debates on Twitter about trade school and whether that's the way to go for a young Zimbabwean. And I have my own reservations on that. Not to say trade school is bad, but I think that people should, if you're good at a certain trade, great. But should someone who is interested in mathematics pursue a trade because that's what they're being told to do, or that's what will get them a job? It's maybe a sad reality, but it's an interesting thing to discuss. I think since Edmore is back, Dr. Shame also was very he contributed a lot on this topic, and I'm wondering if you also have something to add or questions you have related to the topic that was presented today.
Okay. My question and contribution relates to the issue of peace. Of course, you said peace is not a prerequisite for trade. But if we look at most countries in Africa and some of the countries, there's conflict. And at times, if you trade with countries in conflict, you actually fuel the conflict. Like blood diamonds, armed conflicts, they're actually fueled by trade. And then if we then say, oh no, it's just a free trade area, we are just going to trade. So the other country has armed rebels who are selling diamonds or whatever, and we allow the free trade, it can become also a very big problem. But before we go that far, I saw you spoke about democracy. But if we look at African Union, SADC and all these other blocs, they don't really enforce to say, oh, this country had disputed elections, this country, there's human rights abuses. So trade also, I think, can actually enforce to say countries that are not holding free and fair elections, countries that are oppressing people, like those which are in armed conflict and so forth. But we don't see African Union really stamping its authority, like what has been happening in Zimbabwe. We have seen the AU, most of the time they will just rubber stamp whatever that happens in countries like Zimbabwe, DRC, or wherever. So you maybe you can explain the peace trade aspect. Is it just based on the fact that countries that are at peace will trade more with each other? And of course, we really need peace as well for trade to prosper. But can we really say trade can resolve conflicts? I would want you to explain that. Then my other just a contribution, it's not a question, on the free trade. There's actually Southern African Customs Union, which has got South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, and Namibia. They have free trade, there's free movement of goods and everything between those countries, and it's the oldest free trade movement since 1910, if I'm not mistaken. So though there's this free trade area at AU level, it does not cancel out those blocks like the SACU that I have explained, the COMESA, even the SADC. It's just an incremental. And also there are bilateral agreements. So African Union is not saying if you have bilateral agreements with Zambia, Mozambique, Malawi, don't cancel those bilateral agreements. They're just saying it's an incremental to whatever you already have. Yeah, maybe you can come in and talk about the peace trade. I think that's your area, you know better than me. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. a brief comment on the issue of already existing agreements. Yes, the African Continental Free Trade Area is not cancelling out any of those, but it's incremental, as you said. And like I said earlier on, the African Continental Free Trade Area is now coming to try and consolidate all those efforts into one standard for effective implementation and to promote trade in the whole of Africa, to build a single market. And probably that's why we had something like it's an over-ambitious initiative, because it's considering the rest of the continent as a single market. Then coming to the issue of the peace trade nexus, my idea here is to say one cannot exist in the absence of the other. We cannot have free trade or effective trade amongst African countries without peace. And we cannot have peace without effective trade amongst ourselves as African countries. And as I said during my presentation, that liberalization alone also creates risks for conflict or instability. So that's why I recommended the AU embassy model, that which I said we are now trying to push for the decentralization of the African Union from the overhanging authority, overhanging continental authority, to at least come down to the country level to monitor issues at the country level and make intervention at the country level where there's crisis. I hope that answers the concern. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. I see no more questions, but thank you all for attending. We've come to the end of this session today. We appreciate Dr. Edmore. I know that you're a doctor in waiting, yes, but it will be coming soon. So, Dr. Edmore, so thank you very much for gracing us today and for telling us about the African Free Continental Trade Area. It was something very new to me, actually, so I was learning quite a lot from you. This is why I was asking maybe some challenging questions, so I apologize for that. And thank you to my co-host, Dr. Latenda, and thank you to all the attendants. We appreciate you coming to this session. We see you for the next session. Happy Friday and happy weekend. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.